Comics Inebriated, a podcast about the history of fiction and nonfiction in comics, along with current events, hosted by comic creators Liana Kangas and permanent guest Matt Emmons.
Hello, and welcome back to Comics Inebriated. I'm Liana Kangas. I'm your host with permanent guest.
Hello.
I have to introduce you like this every time, don't I? With permanent guest Matt Emmons, who is currently in timeout now. I've just decided.
Yeah, I'm facing the corner, and I have a lot to think about.
Yeah. This episode is with Joe Corallo, who's very important to me and is my co-collaborator on many things. And I will introduce him and let him take the floor and, tell us a little bit about what he's about.
Hi, I'm Joe Corallo. I'm a comics writer, comics editor, and a Spider-Man person enjoyer. And I thought I would talk a little bit about one of the single most important people to ever Spider-Man, Steve Ditko. A little about me first, because I'm the one talking, is to get an idea of what Spider-Man means to me. I was a big fan of the cartoon growing up. I had too many of the action figures, just too many. It was a burden on my parents. And, I had the video games, but, I had a lot of, the not great ones. I don't know if any of you played the Sega Genesis one with, the Kingpin and all the costumes. It was not great. And you had to save Mary Jane from being dipped into a vat of acid from the Kingpin. It was a lot, and it was very stressful for me as a child. And then I also had the Spider-Man and the X-Men Arcade's Revenge game, and that too was not a fun time. Gambit had to run away from a giant boulder thing, and Wolverine was fighting people in a circus, and Cyclops was trapped in a mine. I don't understand it. I have not revisited it. I don't think a revisit would help me understand it any more than I did at the time. I wanted that one that was based on the cartoon, because I'm a kid, and the kids, they're like, I want the thing that looks like the other thing. And we never owned it, but I rented it, and I beat it, and that was fun. And I wanted to get into the comics a bit at the time. At that age, I was reading stuff like Sonic the Hedgehog because I enjoyed the video game and there was more content, so I could go buy that. And it made sense. It seemed like a logical continuation of the story. At the time that the cartoon was on, the Clone Saga was going on, so I remember getting a random issue of Spider-Man. And there's two Spider-Men. There's this Ben Reilly guy. Doc Ock is there. There was the woman Doc Ock who took over because he got killed. And I'm like, I have no idea what the hell's going on. It was a lot. I don't know why people put up with that for so long. And then they finally did a movie, and I saw that movie 4 times in the movie theaters. Back when you could go to movie theaters. You remember movie theaters? And because, wow, Spider-Man on the big screen. It was really great. And for Spider-Man 2, I went with a friend of mine, Art Tebble. He does Friends at the Table and is a more successful talk into pods guy than I am. And we saw that. We were in college at the time, and we went to this theater in Manhattan, specifically for a midnight showing, because the theater had a guy dressed up as Spider-Man, and that was the reason we wanted to go to this movie. And so I hope that puts everything into perspective, that I am a Spider-Man enjoyer. And I know a thing or two about this Pete Porter, is it? Parker? What? Peter
Parker.
Pete Porter. Pete Porter, yes. So anyway, Ditko. we gotta go back a bit to amazing adult fantasy. Which, if you read those books, do not look anything like you would imagine amazing adult fantasy would look like.
Different.
Yes. It was it was a more innocent time, and the book was going to get canceled. Stan had this Spider-Man idea. Everyone hated it, and he's great. Blah blah blah. Anyway, so first he had this idea, and he wanted Jack Kirby to draw it, and Jack did an awful job. He's a great guy, and he's been dead for a long time, so I don't think anyone's going to be too upset with the notion that he did a horrible Spider-Man. Horrible.
Be careful.
I'm a Fantastic Four fan. He did a wonderful Fantastic Four. But just an awful Spider-Man. Did not get the character. And every once in a while, like, Spider-Man would like show up in stuff that Jack was drawing, and even then, garbage. Who would want to look at that? But so then he ended up having Ditko do it, and Ditko had these different ideas to, like, really is the guy who came up with the costume and all that stuff. And he ended up going with Ditko on this, which was probably a good idea because he was making Jack draw like every other comic. It was like Jack Kirby, Don Heck, Steve Ditko, couple of other people, but like, yeah. So that ended up being a massive success in Amazing Fantasy 15. And it was such a success, they ended up continuing Spider-Man as an ongoing. And the reason they kept Amazing in the title, so it's Amazing Spider-Man, as a tribute to him coming from Amazing Fantasy. I don't know how many people put two and two together. I've met people. I'm assuming not many. So
Wow.
Yeah.
The more you know.
Right? So So yeah, and then Steve Ditko was on the book for through issue, I want to say 38. Did the first couple of annuals, couple of other bits in there with Spider-Man and the Human Torch, stuff like that. But one thing I think that's obvious, but a lot of people don't really focus on, which I think is a mistake, is everyone kind of goes like, "Oh, Steve Ditko created Spider-Man," and it's like, he created nearly everything you associate with the character. And that, I think, doesn't get played up enough. Like, it wasn't just Spider-Man. It was Aunt May, Uncle Ben, Liz Allen, Betty Brant, J. Jonah Jameson, his son, Ned Leeds, Flash Thompson, Gwen Stacy, Mary... Yeah, Mary Jane, even though he never drew her... like how she looked, she was brought up in the comics, and you see her from the back in, like, I want to say, like, in one of the issues in the 20s, it might have been 25, 26, something like that. Aunt May's friend, who was, Mary Jane Watson's aunt. You had almost all the villains, if you think of all the villains that have been used in the movies, Vulture, Electro, the Lizard, Green Goblin, Sandman, Mysterio, like they're all Ditko. I mean, he created, a lot of other villains I think are really great, like the Molten Man. I think he's a lot of fun. Doesn't get enough love. He created some kind of not so great villains and things. Like, I think the Enforcers were created in Spider-Man number 10, and they suck. I do not like them at all.
Drag them.
Yeah, I'll drag them all days. I don't care. Danny Tap Shoes or whatever that guy, fuck him. He's not very good. And then, but the way... the Spider Slayers, Spencer Smythe, like, that's also Ditko. The idea of Spider-Man being in high school. He was only in high school during the Ditko years. He started going to college by, like, issue 31. Like, everyone kind of associates Spider-Man with like this high school sort of character. He was in there for like less than 3 years and had been out of high school and in college for like a while before Ditko even left. Obviously Norman Osborn, also creation of Ditko. By an interesting place to go look for some of this information beyond just reading the original issues is there's a section about this in Fred Van Lente and Ryan Dunleavy's The Comic Book History of Comics, where he talks about Ditko and Stan Lee and their like falling out. And it really started, I want to say, around issue 18. It might have been sooner.
Mm-hmm.
But basically what happened was Ditko was demanding, proper credit. And Stan is not about that. And it was Steve really persisting and not letting up that got Steve co-creator credit for the first time. Well, not co-creator, but like co-plotter on the comics in the credits. Starting with issue 25, with the first appearance of the Spider Slayers and Spencer Smythe. So, that was interesting to see, like, the more that Stan sort of gave in to Steve wanting proper credit, the worse the relationship got until eventually, they just sort of parted ways because it got to a point where Stan just flat out refused to talk to Steve. And everything had to be done through an intermediary.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Damn.
Like, apparently he was not in the loop when they were originally making the show, like the cartoon, like it had gotten back to him, not through Stan, and like a lot of weird stuff like that. And if you go back and read a lot of the old letters columns, because I read all the letters columns for every Ditko issue, you see these things like you knew about Stan and his ego, but like knowing that now when you read it, it's like really, awful. Like you just read these sort of comments and like Stan will answer some of these letters. Like every once in a while they'll print something that's like, it'll be like, dear, like Steve and Stan. And Stan will like take that personally and write that back in the letter. And they'll be like, Stan doesn't understand why you wrote Steve's name first instead of Stan. And he's sad about it. Like, that's legit. You go back and read those letters, and he does the pettiest stuff. But, like, you also have to understand, the Marvel method is a crock of shit. The way to write comics like that,
What a relief.
it wasn't the reason that happened wasn't a great creative thought, this is what we should do. It was out of necessity. Stan was writing nearly everything. He didn't have time to not only be like the editor-in-chief of the company and like basically run it, but to also fully script out, 12, 15 or so comics a month.
Mm-hmm.
So the Marvel method was created to allow him to have some flexibility. And then they turned it into like, wow, this is an ingenious idea. And it's like, no, you only do that when you literally don't have a choice.
Yeah.
And I hope I'm not the first person to tell you, dear listener, that the Marvel method is a crock of shit. Like, I'm glad if you're just hearing this now, that like you can kind of like let that, sort of sink in. And if you do utilize sort of the Marvel method and that sort of stuff, you can't do it without at least giving your artist a co-plotter credit because they're coming up with the plot. You can't not do that.
Is there a happy ending to this story?
They're both dead. I mean, I guess, it's like, it's not a happy ending because Stan outlives Steve by like months, and it's like I'm kind of convinced that like Stan was just outright refusing to pass until he had outlived Steve Ditko. But That's how I like to think about it.
This is probably the most wonderful history lesson I have ever heard.
And I mean, in Stan's defense, there had been points over the years where he tried to reconcile that Ditko wasn't interested in. He had written wonderful introductions about Steve and how much he loved Steve's work. Um, it's not all bad, but and it was a different time. Freelancers were abused frequently, unlike now where everything's perfect. But it was different. But Ditko, the way he drew Spider-Man and doing it different than Kirby helped that book stand out and become as popular as it did. Because everything just looked like Kirby. And I don't mean to break any hearts, because I've heard from someone that comics will break your heart. But Jack Kirby and Stan Lee comics, like to give you an idea of how much things changed, those are unpublishable today. You could send those to like any publisher. Like if there wasn't already that history, that wouldn't get published. There's no way. The art, and it's not Jack's fault either. Taste change. He was drawing like 4 or so books a month. It was very different. He was an incredibly capable artist that would do gorgeous things, but you can't when you're doing commercial comics that you're like pumping out a full issue a week. Like,
Exactly.
it just doesn't work that way. But it's interesting. You would, if you go back and look through a lot of these comics, like you look back at a lot of the Spider-Man comics in the Ditko era, really anything from Marvel, there's a lot of panels that like have no backgrounds. Just the sensibility of the storytelling. There's a lot of pages where it's like you're going from one scene to another in a single page, and like that's really frowned upon at this point. You kind of, each scene has to take up a page. You don't really jump around. But like going back and looking at the Ditko stuff, I think some of the more interesting stuff is the pacing. Unlike a lot of the other comics at the time, there really was a pretty even balance between the drama that was going on within Peter Parker's own life, dealing with not being able to pay the rent for his aunt and trying to keep his freelance job at the Bugle, and also fighting a stupid monster person who was a dumb scientist who hit a switch and turned into an electric monster or whatever. So like it really was like this interesting balance that I don't think a lot of other comics at the time, from what I've read, was able to strike in the same way. Like the Fantastic Four, they did a really good job establishing that like family dynamic. But I feel like Spider-Man, especially in that time with Ditko really leading the way, made for a more relatable younger character. And they fought off a lot of urges and suggestions, like giving him a sidekick, or he should be someone's sidekick, or he should join a group like the Fantastic Four, and they kept a lot of that at bay for the book's benefit. Some of the things that are kind of like, what if Ditko stayed? He always wanted to keep the reveal of Norman being the Green Goblin longer. That's why literally the issue after he's gone, they reveal that it's Norman, because that was like one of the sticking points for Stan. He really wanted to reveal it, and Ditko really wanted to play a long game. So that's why issue 39, we find out he's Norman. But you see in the Ditko issues earlier, he was planting Norman in the background, planting Norman in scenes with like J. Jonah Jameson and stuff like that, and was really setting all this up. And you got an interesting character arc with Peter, where he was still pretty immature, and he was stuck in this sort of love triangle with Liz Allen and Betty Brant. And seeing him sort of grow up and go to college, and sort of watching him kind of mature was interesting, and that was one of the things that I think Ditko really helped set that foundation for Peter in a way that after he left, you saw a lot of stagnation. Gwen Stacy was not an interesting character, and getting sort of stuck with this character, and just that he was like stuck in college. Like he went from high school to college pretty quick, but then he just like stayed in college for like ever, and the character really, I think, suffered for a bit. Story wise, I mean, art wise, John Romita Sr. I mean, no one's going to argue that, but story wise, kind of stagnated. Wasn't terribly interesting. And then I personally think it wasn't until the last little bit Stan was doing, and then Jerry Conway taking over the book, where you got that level of like creativity and pushing the character in the book forward that we did. So and Jerry worked very closely with John Romita Sr. And then Gil Kane and Ross Andrew. Ross Andrew being one of the most underrated Spider-Man artists, and so I really think there's this long gap of a few years where the character, was still popular, but I think it took a while before he really stepped up to the next level.
This was fucking amazing and really, really informative. And I think that this is going to be probably one of the better fictional episodes that we have.
Oh, that's awesome.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm glad that you got to come on today. One, because I feel like we have not all three hung out before, correct?
We met very, very briefly at New York Comic Con, but that was hectic. So that's it. I think
Matt is second at best on social media.
And
just gonna go ahead and pre-plug him right now.
Cool. Like I recognize the name and other things you say to people when you aren't 100% sure who they are.
Yes. I take no offense at all. If you've seen, I guess the most recent thing, if you've seen anything going around, there's a Kickstarter called Dagger Dagger. I put that together.
That's awesome.
Yeah. But that's otherwise, I've seen you very briefly. I know kind of what you look like.
Well, you sound great, Matt.
You sound great. Oh my god. Well, okay. I'm glad that we get to resonate with the times in which conventions no longer exist.
All right.
My question to both of you is, if you could go to any convention not comics related right now, what would it be? You have to pick one weird industry, I guess.
I've got Joe, you go first.
All right. I mean, for me, the problem is like it's almost cheating because it would be like a horror convention, and there's a lot of overlap. But at the same time,
I'll allow that.
But like like I love, for example, there are so many people in horror I'd love to meet. Like what was it? Like God, why am I blanking on her name right now? It's probably because I've been drinking, but but no, it was, God, why am I? She was, give me 1 second. I'm just going to Google it because it's going to be a lot easier. And you can
Barbara
just keep...
Crampton? For no reason, I want to say it's Barbara Crampton.
No, I was right. It is Jessica Harper. I was like, it can't be Jessica Harper. That name doesn't... I'm like, oh, no, it is. She is in multiple movies. I absolutely love one of my favorite horror movies of all time is the original Suspiria, and she's the lead in that. I love Dario Argento films. Phenomena is another great one. Watch both of those. Jessica Harper also appears briefly in the Suspiria remake, which is also really great, and is also featured in Shock Treatment, which is another favorite movie of mine. I personally like it more than Rocky Horror Picture Show in a lot of ways. I've watched that one more, even though people kind of either forget about it or don't like it as much because it's this weird sort of sequel to Rocky Horror where they didn't get, Susan Sarandon and Barry Bostwick back, and they recast those roles, but a lot of the other people, came back, and
This is no longer a drinking and comics podcast. This is totally a horror movie podcast.
Jessica Harper's been in.
Yeah, and she's also in probably my favorite Brian De Palma film, Phantom of the Paradise.
Would you say that she's your favorite actress?
Oh no, no, but she's
great. Hear this.
Shot down.
No, but
I would never.
Yeah, I know she's fantastic. I absolutely adore her, and she's been in so many films that I adore. Phantom of the Paradise is such a great little film, and it's the villain in it. And again, I'm blanking on the guy's name. Is the guy who wrote like all like the Carpenter songs?
I feel like Matt would probably know this.
Why do birds suddenly appear?
I should know it, but I'm not going to get it.
It's you know what? I will. I'll also look this up.
I'm gonna derail this and just tell you both that I was gonna pick like a gardening and home convention, something real low key and not related to anything that I need to think about whatsoever.
Paul Williams.
I've got
Why couldn't I think of Paul Williams' name? He also did all those Muppet songs. He wrote Rainbow Connection.
Oh,
I don't know any of this.
He's great, and he also what was it? He wrote all the songs for that movie about like the little kids in the mob. That's like a musical, and like God, that's.
They somehow missed the train on all of this.
They shoot like the guns shoot cannolis. It's great.
I don't know any of this in a way that like I've never known any of this.
Change your answer, Matt, because I feel like
no,
you were maybe leaning into the horror now.
No, I feel like I don't belong at those. I feel like this isn't true, but I feel like if I walked into a horror convention, someone would pick me up and be like, "You don't belong here," and then they put me outside, and I would go get like a sub or something. I don't know why, but no, I think I'm torn between two.
Okay.
I would either want to go to like a D&D convention and just play D&D for like 48 hours straight.
No sleeping.
No need for sleeping because my character will sleep narratively, and then or
long rest or short rest?
Both, because warlocks benefit just the same from either pretty much.
Mm-hmm.
Or I would go to a Pokemon convention.
Yes!
Because I can play it competitively, but I don't enjoy it. But I could absolutely beat a bunch of like 10-year-olds. So it's just, again, 48 hours straight of me wrecking a bunch of kids.
You're like just destroying their lives and their futures.
Speaking of beating up a bunch of kids, the name of that movie was Bugsy Malone. And
oh my God.
It stars like child Jodie Foster and Scott Baio.
Transition. I can't.
I'm not physically hurting.
Delightful. It's delightful. You're definitely giving those kids PTSD by like destroying them in Pokemon.
Yeah.
But then I
would enjoy that con just seeing like a giant, massive grown man in a Pikachu suit.
You think
know what I mean?
Oh, I thought you were about to say I'm massive. I'm like, okay, I'm 5'8". I can't be massive.
That was my one question for wrapping up this podcast, and it was so heinously derailed. I love it so much. Thank you, Joe, so much for coming on this podcast. You're the most fucking delightful person drunk. We've gotten drunk so many times together.
Yeah, it's great time.
But where can we find you, and what books can everyone read by you right now?
Well, you can find me on Twitter at Joe Corallo. So for you who might just be listening to the audio, not wanting to bother looking at the spelling. It's a JoeCorallo. And then if you want to follow me on Instagram, where I don't post anything and occasionally share someone else's story I'm tagged in, you can find me at Corallo Joe. I'm not going to repeat the spelling. It's the same spelling. It's just the words are reversed. I was the co-creator of She Said Destroy. I did the Mine anthology, which won the Ringo in 2018 for Best Anthology, as well as the Deadbeats anthology, which was just recently nominated for Ringo for Best Anthology, and features work from Liana Kangas in both. Liana and I are doing a short that's like kind of been announced. It's
Yeah,
like,
it still surprises me every time that I'm like, yeah, that's happening. Oh, okay.
yeah, and that's great, and then I have a slew of shorts and things that haven't been announced yet. I'm working on two unannounced miniseries, as well as having just recently edited Lost on Planet Earth, a Comixology Originals miniseries. All 5 episodes are available on Comixology right now.
And I think too, your Mine anthology that you edited and put together with Glenn, that was also one of the stories was nominated for an Eisner too, right?
Yes, Ethel Byrne by Cecil Castellucci and Scott Chandler, and we lost out to a short story about how important libraries are. So I hope you're happy, libraries.
Oh, award
Library.
season. You never cease to amaze us. I wanted to point that out just because it seems like you have a lot of credentials in a lot of ways, but you're not the type of person online to like force it down people's throats. So congratulations. This is actually really the first time that I get to tell you congratulations for Deadbeats getting nominated for Ringo.
Yeah,
So
congratulations.
Thank you so much. Like, I don't know. Like, social media is kind of this horrifying hellscape, and I feel weird just talking about any minor accomplishment. And it's nice to just throw some credentials around after having like 2.5 glasses of wine, about to talk about Steve Ditko.
yeah,
But yeah.
yeah. Well, we're here to celebrate those accomplishments and make you realize, like that's what friends do. And I also feel like I resonated and lived it with you, seeing as we were doing She Said Destroy at the same time.
Yeah.
You were editing Deadbeats and, creating that with the publisher and stuff like that. So,
Yeah.
really fun. That book is really good.
Thank you.
It's one of my highest selling books at the cons, especially for those that love anthologies. It's always the first one that's picked up because it has that gorgeous cover by Lisa. So,
Yeah.
congrats on your Ringo nominations. You're amazing.
Thank you.
And thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for helping make a book worthy of a Ringo nomination.
Thank you guys so much for joining. Again, I am Liana Kangas, your host. You can find me at Liana Kangas on Twitter, Twitch, Instagram, etc. Posting all those stories that Joe does not. And then you can find Matt at.
They can find me on Instagram at second.at.best. And they can find me on Twitter at second@best_. Neither are convenient, but it is what it is. Thank you so much for coming over, everyone. Goodbye, good night, and good luck.